Hi, my name's Alan and I'm a self-proclaimed AWS evangelist, and today I'm going to talk about Amazon S3. Amazon Simple Storage Service, S3, is an object storage service offering industry-leading scalability, data availability, security, and performance. Customers of all sizes and industries can store and protect any amount of data for virtually any use case, such as data lakes, cloud-native applications, mobile apps. With cost-effective storage classes and easy-to-use management features, you can optimize costs, organize your data, and configure fine-tuned access controls to meet both specific business, organizational, and compliance requirements. That's according to the AWS website. For a newbie in the AWS world, this could be daunting. So let's start from the start. How do we create an S3 bucket? Now, before we get started, some of you are already saying, you're screaming at the screen, but there's already thousands of these videos out there. There is. And I'm going to cover the creation of an S3 bucket in multiple ways. I'll also briefly talk about the small, insignificant topic of S3 bucket security. So, creating a bucket. To kick this topic off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and share my screen. You know, we're all used to doing that right now, aren't we, since the Zoom era started. Ta-da! Okay, run my laptop over here to my left. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go into the console and we're going to create a S3 bucket straight from S3. This will be the first way of actually creating a bucket, right? So if we go down here, we click on S3. And then we go and create bucket. And then we're going to just put in here our bucket name. So I'm going to put in here Alan's Awesome Bucket 1. Let's hope no one's taken that right. I'm in luck. All right, what's next on my list? The region. Okay, well, I'm in Sydney. So I'm going to leave that as Sydney. We've got no settings to copy from another bucket. That's fine. This is our first bucket. And then we've got object ownership. Block public access settings for this bucket. Bucket versioning, tags, default encryption, advanced settings, object lock. What do these all mean? I know I'm just going to go click create because that's what I'm going to do. And I've got my bucket. But there was a lot of things to consider there. There was a lot of settings to confuse a new person who doesn't understand the AWS ecosystem. So we're going to look inside this bucket at what we've just done. And that is we've created an empty bucket. We go into properties. Bucket version's not configured. There's no tags. There's no encryption. Intelligent tiering archiving is not enabled. There's no server access logging. And if we carry on going through our permissions here, well, at least our bucket's not public, right? So that's one good thing. So that's creating a bucket in the console. So what are the defaults that have been applied there? Well, one of the main defaults that came across in the console there was block public access was enabled by default. And that was created straight from this screen just here. We've got a tick box which is ticked by default to block all public access. That's quite new in the terms of how old S3 is. It's been around for probably about a year now, but back when S3 was first created, that was not a thing. And there were many security flaws out there and badly configured buckets that created a many security breach out there for many customers. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Anyway, so moving on, we're going to look now at other ways of creating a bucket. We've just created one in the console. And despite there being many settings to confuse people, we still got there. The next one that I'm going to do is CloudFormation. CloudFormation is a declarative language that allows you to create infrastructure as code. We're not going to go into what more it is. That's not the scope of this, but we want to create ourselves a bucket. And so that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to look at the source code, the language of CloudFormation that creates our basic bucket. And so let's have a look at the laptop again. So what you can see here on my screen, Visual Studio Code and the source code here to create a bucket. We have 3 lines effectively. Some of you are going to scream, what's that at the top? Yeah, okay, we always need this in our buckets, but these 3 lines here, or these 2 lines here, are responsible for creating the S3 bucket. Is it going to work? Let's find out. Go back to our AWS console, look at CloudFormation, and then we're going to go and create a new stack. Our template is ready. We're going to upload it, and we're going to choose the file to upload. So I've selected my template, and then I'm going to press next. I'm going to give it a name, Alan's Awesome Bucket, and then press next, next, and we're going to create that stack. Now that's started here with making resources. Resource creation has started. I'm just going to refresh that. And it's completed. So let's have a look what that end result was. If we go into S3 now, what we can see is another bucket. But this time, it's got other digits around it. Alan's Awesome Bucket, dash S3 bucket, dash some random digits. This is how CloudFormation names your buckets if you don't give it a name. It will use your stack name plus the resource type with a random digit. So what are the defaults that are in this right now? So if we look at the defaults of this bucket that's just been created by infrastructure as code, a best practice way of creating infrastructure in Amazon Web Services, we have a look at the properties, and again we have versioning disabled, encryption disabled, nothing else is configured. We look at permissions, and all of a sudden objects can be public, and this block public access is disabled. Oh no. Oh no. So that's a difference right there. We don't have this particular setting enabled by default. And that's cool because at the end of the day, it's a declarative language. It does exactly what it's told. And we didn't tell it to do that. Whereas in the previous bucket, it was told to do it by default. So we're going to move on and try one other language now. One of the infrastructure as code language, and that is Terraform. So if we come out of here and go to a command prompt, let's make that nice and big so you can all see it. And then I'm going to go into my Terraform folder. And I have 2 buckets here, 2 folders here. So I'm just going to go into the one that's relevant right now. And then I'm just going to make sure that I can apply this stack. And then I'm going to apply it. Now while that applies, you'll see it's very quick. Done. My bucket's there. Much quicker than CloudFormation, I noticed. Let's have a quick look at the code for that. And what you can see here is, again, we have a resource block with nothing more than the resource type. That's it. So how did it create that? What does that look like? What's the name? So if we have a look at our buckets just here, this time we've got a completely random bucket name in what is perceived to be our account just here. Terraform -202207. It's actually a timestamp, right? We look at the defaults. Again, we can see there's no versioning, there's no encryption, and block public access isn't actually enabled. So whilst it's much easier and much cleaner to create the bucket through infrastructure as code, there are certain defaults that need enabling after the fact, that to make it not public compared to making it by default. Now that's not to say that we can't disable that default setting, the default of block public access, when we create a bucket in the console, but why would we? We want to keep everything secure. So what do we do from here? So we want to secure our bucket. What we don't want to do is cause a data breach, as I showed you earlier. Best practices for securing an S3 bucket are ensuring that your bucket is not public. That's becoming a thing now. Implementing least privilege access. Using IAM roles where possible to allow resources to access S3. Encryption at rest, object versioning when required, cross-region replication, object lock, endpoints. There's so many other ways of securing your buckets. But realistically, we're only going to concentrate on one of these right now, and which to me feels like one of the most important ones. And that's to make sure that your bucket is not public. So we're going to do that again. We're going to just check our console first. Then we're going to go and make our buckets not public in infrastructure as code. So if we go back over here to the laptop, and we're going to have a look at our bucket. As we mentioned earlier, our bucket is not public by default. However, if by whatever reason our bucket was like this, all we'd have to do is tick the box. And that's it. That's all we do to make sure that our buckets stay private. And one of the really cool things about this is by ticking that, there's no way that my bucket can be made public until I've disabled that. For those of you that are aware of the feature, it's like termination protection on RDS or EC2. And then you just save that, confirm, and your bucket is protected. So let's look at the difference there with infrastructure as code now. So with Amazon S3 block public access, account administrators and bucket owners can easily set up centralized controls to limit public access to their Amazon S3 resources that are enforced regardless of how the resources are created. In other words, unless I untick this box, it's not being made public by a click, API call, or any other programmatic call that may try. Other actions we could take to ensure proactively that our bucket would not be public. We could make sure we're not using the star wildcard as a principle for our bucket policies. We could also make sure we're not using the everyone or any authenticated AWS user options in the ACL. Make sure that you're aware that any authenticated AWS user means any AWS user, not just in your account. This has been a huge gotcha for big companies in the past. There's many other ways to be proactive with security on your buckets, but today is not the day for this. I mean, this video is meant to be short and quick, not the Star Wars saga. Let's look at CloudFormation now and what we can do in CloudFormation to protect our buckets again. So we're going back to the laptop, and we're just going to have a quick look at the code first. And what you'll notice is compared to where we started with just one line, we now have some properties with a block of code to block public access configurations. So I'm going to run this now on a brand new bucket inside of AWS and show you the configuration there. And I'm also going to then use it to update the existing bucket that we just created. So I'm going into CloudFormation. I'm then going to create a new stack. I'm going to upload my template, choose File, and we're going to choose the Create Secure Bucket. Open that. Next, give it a name, My Awesome Secure Bucket. Next, and create stack. So it's going to refresh this a couple of times. You can see it's starting to create the resource. And we'll just wait for a second for it to load. You'll notice here under resources, S3 bucket, my awesome bucket, S3 with its numbers, as we looked at earlier. And I'm just going to open that now. And if we look at the permission sets, we now have block all public access switched on a brand new bucket. We can also use that same template to update my existing one using either a change set or an update. I'm going to use a change set to be safe. Create change set, replace, upload, and we're going to create secure bucket again. Next, and create change set. Creating a change set just creates an audit of items that may change in the CloudFormation stack. You can then choose to execute it at a later date or time. But realistically, you'll need to review what's going to change first. So here I can see there's going to be a modification to the S3 bucket, and it won't replace it. So I'm going to execute that now. And again, it just takes a couple of moments to update. And then if we have a look at our other bucket that we created, our first bucket, you'll see here I've got Alan's awesome bucket. That's the original one that we created. We'll click on permissions and you'll see now we have block all public access switched on. And that's from a CloudFormation update. So now we're going to try and do the same thing in Terraform. So if we look at our source code again for Terraform, and this time we're going to look at the Create Secure Bucket template, you'll notice that compared to our original template, which just had the resource block, we look at here, and now we have to have a second resource block. That second resource block creates the block public access setting. So we're just going to run that now against a new bucket, and then you'll be able to compare those permissions. So if we come out of there, go into Create Secure Bucket, and we're going to go TF plan. Looks okay. We're going to go TF apply. And that should create us a brand new bucket with secure settings almost as quickly as we made the first bucket. We're going to go back to our S3. And what you'll notice here is another bucket that was created moments ago with block permission enabled. So that's how you create an S3 bucket in 3 different ways: in the console, in CloudFormation, and in Terraform. One of the things that I just wanted to highlight today is the changing landscape of the cloud, specifically in S3 today, but this applies to many other services. Security is always going to be important. There's always going to be cyber attacks, new and old, being used against infrastructure that we launch in the cloud. There's always going to be new languages, new technology to make life easier. We started with just the AWS Console. CloudFormation was a thing. Then Terraform became a thing because it allows you to bring together many other cloud technologies. I highly encourage anyone to look at all three of these methods and work out what suits them best. But I can also say that it's handy to have all three in your back pocket, to be able to use the console, to be able to use CloudFormation, and to be able to use Terraform. Because at the end of the day, that flexibility makes you agnostic in the cloud, and it means you're not restricted to any one feature set or language set. If you've got any questions on this, let me know. Leave it in the comments somewhere down there. I don't normally do this YouTube thing. I'm new to it, so if the comments up there, I do apologise, or even if they're over there. But in the meantime, have a great night. I'm Alan, and I'll catch you later.